You're standing in a dealership parking lot on a Saturday afternoon. The salesman is walking you around a brand new sedan. He's talking about the advanced engineering, the refined transmission, the precision-tuned suspension. He mentions the warranty, 5 years, 60,000 miles, comprehensive coverage. You ask him a simple question: how long will this car last? He pauses, smiles, says something about proper maintenance, about how cars today are built better than ever. And technically, he's not wrong. Modern vehicles are marvels of engineering. They're safer, more efficient, more reliable in almost every measurable way than cars from 30 or 40 years ago. But he didn't answer your question, because the answer is complicated. Not because he doesn't know, but because the answer reveals something about the entire structure of the automotive industry that most people never think about. The truth is, your car is designed to last exactly as long as the company needs it to, not a year longer. Let's start with something that sounds obvious. Car companies are in the business of selling cars. That's how they make money. They design vehicles, manufacture them, sell them to dealers, and dealers sell them to you. It's a straightforward transaction. But here's where it gets interesting. If a car company builds a vehicle that lasts forever, or even just 40 years with minimal maintenance, what happens? You buy it once, you drive it for decades, you never come back. Your children inherit it, maybe your grandchildren. The company made one sale and then lost you as a customer for the next half century. Now imagine the opposite scenario. Imagine a car that lasts exactly 12 years. Long enough that you feel like you got your money's worth. Long enough that you don't feel cheated. But not so long that you forget what it's like to shop for a new car. Not so long that the company loses you to the used market permanently. Which car would a rational company choose to build? This isn't a conspiracy. It's not some shadowy backroom decision. It's just math. It's incentive structures playing out exactly as you'd expect them to. Car companies employ some of the smartest engineers on the planet. People who understand metallurgy, thermodynamics, computer systems, aerodynamics. They know how to make components that last. They've proven it. There are engines from the 1980s still running today with 300,000 miles on them. There are transmissions that could theoretically operate for 1,000,000 miles if you just changed the fluid. So why don't modern cars routinely last that long? Because durability has diminishing returns, and in some cases, it has negative returns. Think about it from the engineer's perspective. You're designing a transmission. You could use heavier gears, thicker bearings, more robust seals. You could make it last twice as long, but that transmission would cost more to manufacture. It would weigh more, reducing fuel efficiency. It would take up more space in the vehicle. And most importantly, it would reduce the likelihood that the customer comes back in 10 years. Your manager asks you, why are we spending an extra $200 per vehicle on a transmission that lasts 30 years when our average customer trades in at 8? You don't have a good answer, so you optimize for 8 years, maybe 10. You build in a safety margin so most vehicles make it past the warranty period without catastrophic failure. But you don't over-engineer. You don't build for eternity. This is where planned obsolescence gets misunderstood. Most people think it means companies deliberately install time bombs in their products. A chip that fails at exactly 60,000 miles. A seal that degenerates at precisely 7 years. That's not how it works. Not usually. Planned obsolescence is subtler. It's about choosing not to make something more durable when you easily could. It's about calibrating components to fail in a predictable window. It's about using materials that are good enough, but not better than necessary. It's about optimization. And optimization, by definition, means eliminating excess. Excess durability is waste. At least, that's how the spreadsheet sees it. But there's another layer to this, because car companies don't just make money selling new vehicles. They make money servicing them. Every dealership has a service department, oil changes, brake replacements, transmission fluid, tire rotations. These aren't just conveniences, they're profit centers. For many dealerships, the service department generates more consistent revenue than vehicle sales. Now think about what happens if you design a car that needs less service, longer intervals between oil changes, brake pads that last twice as long, a transmission that never needs fluid replacement. You've just undermined your own service revenue. Again, this isn't evil, it's just business. The company has invested millions in service infrastructure, Trained technicians, diagnostic equipment, parts inventory, all of that costs money. All of it needs to generate returns. A car that never breaks down is a car that never comes back to the dealership. And a customer who never comes back is a customer you've lost touch with. They're not seeing your new models, they're not hearing about your latest financing offers. They've disappeared from your ecosystem. Loyal customers are supposed to be repeat customers, but you can't repeat if the original product refuses to wear out. So the incentive isn't just to avoid over-engineering for durability. The incentive is to create ongoing touch points, scheduled maintenance, predictable wear items, reasons to come back. This is why certain components are designed to be replaced rather than repaired. It's why some parts are integrated into larger assemblies, so a $50 sensor failure requires replacing a $600 module. It's why software updates sometimes require dealership visits instead of over-the-air downloads. Every touch point is an opportunity. Every service visit is a chance to upsell, to plant the seed for the next purchase. But here's where it gets even more complex. Consumers say they want cars that last forever. In surveys, people consistently rank reliability and durability as top priorities. They say they want to keep their vehicles for 15, 20 years. They say they'd pay more for better quality. But when it's time to actually buy, most people don't behave that way. They choose the vehicle with more features for less money. They prioritize the infotainment system over the transmission warranty. They finance for 72 months and trade in at 60 because they want the newer model with the better safety tech. The market speaks louder than surveys, and the market says that most buyers won't actually pay a significant premium for extreme durability. So car companies optimize for what people actually do, not what they say they want. They build cars that feel premium, that have the features buyers expect, that hit the price points that move inventory, and yes, that last long enough to maintain the brand's reputation for quality. But not longer, because longer doesn't generate returns. There's something else happening beneath the surface, something about how modern manufacturing has changed the equation entirely. Decades ago, building a durable car and building a cheap car were fundamentally different processes. You used different materials, different techniques, different supply chains. A luxury vehicle built to last was expensive because durability itself was expensive. But modern manufacturing has inverted this relationship in unexpected ways. Today's factories are optimized for precision and consistency. Computer-controlled machinery can produce components to tolerances that would have been impossible 40 years ago. The technology exists to make nearly everything more durable without significantly increasing cost. So why doesn't it happen? Because the bottleneck isn't capability, it's strategy. When you can make something last twice as long for only 10% more cost, you're faced with a choice. Do you absorb that cost to delight customers, or do you pocket the savings and calibrate the product's lifespan to match your business model? Most companies choose the latter, not because they're short-sighted, but because Wall Street rewards quarterly earnings, not customer satisfaction 20 years from now. The executive who extends product lifespan by 5 years won't be around to see the benefit, but they will be around to explain why profit margins contracted, why sales projections fell, why the stock price dropped. Corporate incentives have a time horizon, and that horizon is usually shorter than the potential lifespan of the products being made. Now, some people will point to exceptions. There are brands known for longevity, vehicles that routinely hit 300,000 miles. Owners who keep the same car for 25 years. Those brands exist in a specific market segment. They attract a specific type of customer, someone who values durability above features, someone who's willing to pay more upfront for lower lifetime costs, someone who plans to keep the vehicle for decades. That's a viable business model, but it's a niche. The mass market doesn't work that way. The mass market wants affordable payments and the latest technology. The mass market trades in every 7 years, and that's who most car companies are building for. There's also the question of technological obsolescence. Even if your car's engine could run for 1,000,000 miles, would you want to drive a 20-year-old vehicle? One without modern safety features? Without smartphone integration, durability matters less. A product that feels outdated before it wears out won't be valued for how long it lasts. Car companies understand this. Consumer electronics trained people to expect replacement cycles. Phones feel old after 3 years, laptops after 5. Cars were never going to be different. So vehicles are designed around how long they are actually kept. 8 to 10 years of feeling solid, modern, and dependable is enough. What happens after that belongs to the second owner, the third, or the scrapyard. Something interesting happens in that transition. Used cars often become more durable by accident. The second owner has different incentives. They aren't chasing the latest features. They can't afford frequent trade-ins. They learn to repair things themselves and rely on independent mechanics. As a result, a car designed for 8 years often lasts 15 or 20. Engineers didn't plan for owners who maintain proactively, replace wear items early, and treat the vehicle as an investment rather than a consumable. This reveals an uncomfortable truth for manufacturers. Their products can last far longer than intended, but only outside the original ownership model. The business depends on customers who don't hold on too long, who value convenience over cost, and who see cars as lifestyle products, not long-term assets. In markets where people must keep cars longer, this becomes obvious. Vehicles from the 1990s are still running, still working, still moving families, not because they were better engineered, but because they had to be maintained. The parts, skills, and repair culture exist to keep them alive. In wealthier markets, that infrastructure is disappearing. Skilled rebuilders are retiring. Parts are increasingly proprietary. Diagnostic software is locked behind subscriptions. Modern cars could last, but the surrounding system makes longevity impractical. Planned obsolescence isn't a conspiracy. It's the rational outcome of incentives. Companies seek returns. Customers want features and convenience. Dealers need service revenue. Investors demand growth. Each decision makes sense alone. Together, they create a system where durability is calibrated, not maximized. We know this, and we still participate. Because opting out means driving older cars, accepting outdated technology, and spending time on maintenance. Most people accept the trade, convenience and novelty in exchange for longevity and repairability. The cycle continues, not because anyone forces it, but because everyone agrees to it.